We need to get the creative side of our brain working.
Could you repeat that one more time?
Yeah, what would your budgets, if you could have one budget superpower to solve one of these challenges here in Westland, or all of the challenges, what would it be? What do you wish you could just do?
Yep. Mine would be the same time travel piece, is go back and make sure that our frozen base was at an adequate level. That would
Okay,
be,
all right.
that would be dreamy. Time travel,
Budget
financial time.
superpower, time travel. I love it. All right. Is that yours too, Kevin? Okay.
Getting 100% buy-in from the community on everything we do related to this would be my
100%
superpower.
consensus.
But it's impossible in this world. But
Not when you have a superpower, it's
you-
not.
you said
Okay.
if you have a
I told
super.
you, the guideline here is to dream big. So Carol, what about you?
Barring time travel, I would say just having the state come up with a new mechanism for calculating property tax revenues for cities.
Okay. Alyssa?
I would say maybe expense time freeze so that we would stop the rising inflation that we cannot keep up with.
Yeah, like Elsa and Frozen, you're just gonna freeze it. I love it. Okay.
I really loved that money tree example.
Yes.
I'd love to have one of those. That would be really nice.
Okay.
First fusion reactor in the city.
First fusion reactor in the city. Okay.
That's his engineer brain. It's talking.
I love it. I love these budgeting superpowers. It does tap into some real desires around consensus and thinking about structure and how we're organized. And so anyway, I don't know that we'll be able to solve all of those things, but we can prioritize things. We can certainly do that. And that's what we're going to work on today. All right. Well, let's jump into it then, shall we? You guys ready to get started? I'm going to start by just sharing a little bit of an overview of what is on this placemat. So this is, you should all have one of these in front of you. And for some folks, it's really helpful to be able to take notes as we go along through the discussion. And so you'll see here, there's some different considerations that we'll work through. I'm going to be capturing some notes up here as we talk about these things. But let me just walk you through what this looks like. So some of the considerations we'll look at today involve impact. So thinking about voter level concern, the alignment with Westland's mission, core services, strategic goals or priorities, the impact. So thinking about conversations you've had with your constituents, what's the voter level of concern, or I'm sorry, we talked about impact, urgency. What will happen if this priority does not move forward? So thinking about what are some of the consequences that we might see if something doesn't move. And then thinking about readiness. Again, thinking about your constituents that you're in contact with. Overall voter support for this investment. Do we have clear understanding of the need, or is additional research or polling needed? And then thinking about anything that moves forward, especially something that requires something to go before the voters, that requires council campaigning and engagement. And so really thinking about council capacity and who's going to lead the campaign or engagement, what's the level of effort required. So if you think about something like parks, parks are typically things when you do polling are pretty widely supported. Sometimes it doesn't require as much effort versus like if you're going out for something different. It could require a lot more engagement because people may not be familiar with the challenge, or it may not be something they interact with every day. I feel like parks are sometimes easier because people so frequently use them and are more familiar with that particular city asset. So anyhow, thinking about what's the complexity when you think about the level of council engagement and campaigning that might be required. And so these things are color coded. So you have all of the potential priorities here, and they're divided into 3 categories. So amenities, infrastructure, and services. So as we go through each one, you'll see there's an opportunity to kind of highlight using this scale of 1 to 5, the impact, the urgency, the readiness. You can put notes here. There's nothing scientific about this. This is really for your own use to kind of keep track of your thoughts as you go through it. It's to help help keep you centered. So when we get to the prioritization exercise, you have a sense of where you want to place your priorities. And then just a space over here for additional notes. Questions about that? I would ask, and it might be helpful if you could put your name on. I have a space here for your name, and you might want to put it at the top of all of the cards because it would be helpful to gather these at the end. So staff has some, if you do take notes on it, staff can maybe use that to help as they think about how they come forward to you in future meetings and in designing work session materials and things. If you are going to take notes on this, it might be helpful if you don't mind providing them to them after the fact. So
Sorry to interrupt. Does anybody have a pen? Does anybody need a pen at the table?
we have pens right
Oh,
here.
we got-
Thank you.
Thanks. Anybody else? Just, maybe it's just me.
Anybody? All right, well, if anybody's runs out, we've got an extra
Thank
and
you.
more. Okay. All right, any questions about the tool? Okay, feel free to scribble away. So how we'll lead into this is we'll have staff queue us up for each one of these. We can go in the order of your worksheet unless you guys have a different preference and start with the areas in amenities with parks acquisition, and we'll have staff give an overview, and then we'll kind of work through each one of these areas. It's open for question, discussion. You have the rest of the leadership team here to help support with any technical expertise that might be needed. So you guys can make sure you have a full understanding of what the priority is and all the considerations. Sound good? All right, let's do it. Let's start with parks acquisition.
Okay, thank you, Sarah. So for each of these, my thought was we'll just explain what we've put together for you, and then opportunity to perhaps talk to the staff person who's most closely related to it. I guess the big chart here is a slightly different order from the memo. We'll go in this order because I think it makes the most sense. The first two, you remember in the last conversation, we ended up with amenities, services, and infrastructure. So the first two categories are the amenities, and we'll just start there. Before I go into that, I want to make sure you know what you have in the packet. It's like a series of nesting dolls. You can go into as much information as you would like. The least information and the easiest overview is this page here, which has each category. And for each of these, we have just a quick description. We have a very rough amount in some cases, or in some cases, a very scientific amount. We have our estimate about whether that's an annual cost or a total cost. So for example, if you're doing a couple of big projects, you might want the total cost. If it's an ongoing piece of funding, you might want the annual cost. And then per your request, we've matched it to the most commonly used funding sources used either here already or by other neighboring cities. And we'll talk through each of those and why they're a good match. And then we have the revenue options comparison. That's the attachment 2. And what that is a quick sort of thumbnail of how much revenue is generated by what kind of rate. So for example, and this is all put together by Lauren. And for example, if you have a penny per thousand in a local option levy, that's $45,000 a year. So 10 pennies per thousand, $450,000 a year. On our utility bills, if you add $1 of fee in any category, so if every account is paying $1, you have $108,000 in annual income, roughly. And then the GO bond, we have that similar number of the pennies per thousand. And so those give you a little snapshot. We also have that if you're a visual thinker. We have a little owl on a branch over here. Of course, my favorite drawing that Lauren did of this. So another way to think about it, but just sort of a tool so that we start getting the sense of scale. And then we also thought it was important to think about the costs that folks are already contributing or paying to the city of West Lynn. And so we put together our property tax rate, our capital bond, and all of the fees that every account pays. And if you add those together, just to think about it, for an average household, obviously there's some very highly assessed houses, there's lower assessed houses. This is the average assessed rate in the city of West Lynn, combined with our utility rates. It's about $2,500 a year for an average household. And then, as Doug reminded me this morning, one piece that's not in there is the library district. So the library district obviously levied separately, but the city of West Lynn does receive funds for that, for funding our library. And Doug, you thought that was maybe about $100, $120 a household. Yeah. So just for that sense of scale. It's really important, I think, as we consider all of these, that we're aware of how folks view their bills. We have to remember the financial challenges that households are having. You all have talked about that many times. There's both pieces of the picture, obviously, are important. Also in the packet, just for a reminder, you all have seen these charts many times because they are my favorites. This attachment 4 has our comparative monthly utility rate versus other cities, and attachment 5 is that really key one which shows our FTE capacity per function relative to our neighboring cities. And I think this really is an important one. The key line is that one in the middle under the general services departments, the FTEs per capita, where you can see that West Lynn has by far the lowest FTE per capita. And that's when you take out all the unique services. That doesn't include, for example, Wilsonville's transit department or Lake Oswego's fire department. It's just apples and apples and apples on this chart. And it's a really important way of thinking about what we do. So we're happy to talk about any or all of those in more detail, but this is just for the sense of scale. Our plan is just to go through the memo that was provided to you at a really general level. You don't want to hear from us too much here, but I'll share some of our thoughts and in some cases call on our staff. So going in this order, the amenities, the parks acquisition and the waterfront area projects are in some ways or are definitely the least specific numbers that we were able to put together. And that's because this could be as big of a category or as small of a category as you would like to think about. So when you're thinking about parks acquisition, some of you may be thinking about one specific thing, like we need to buy the property at Oppenlander. Some of you may be thinking about other properties. Some of you may be thinking about facilities on those properties. So for example, at the last conversation, you talked about the Parker Road site and a possible phase 1 recreation center. So any and all of those things could be in here. And it's a starting point for a conversation. So it bundles together a couple of topics that you raised at your last work session. We listed $10 million here. And so that is probably a sense of scale. That's enough to do probably our share of Oppenlander if the council chooses to go down that path, to start some kind of a project at Parker Road and maybe have a little bit left over for some other site. And but as you can tell from the way I'm describing it, this could be quite a bit more, could be quite a bit less if it was to be one specific project. Yes, sir.
Councilor Groner, please.
Yes, it seems to me within that category, there may be very different levels of priority. For example, Oppenlander, I think we have an opportunity sometime in the next year to make a decision. And I think that's fairly high priority. What kind of decision we make? Acquisition of other parklands and building something in Tanner Creek, I think is something that should be deferred. It's lower priority. Not that we don't want it, but it's not quite demanding of a decision at this time.
Thank you, Councilor. Councilor Bright, would you like to?
I think also when looking at these, at the acquisition, we also have to consider, it ties back into the general fund staffing. That if we acquire lots more park facilities, then how can we manage that with the existing park staff?
And good thoughts, both of you, on the, I'm trying to pivot away from calling it relating it to the rec center because of what happened with Happy Valley's rec center. So I'm kind of like thinking of a different topic, but really in my thinking, we own that property next to Tanner Creek at Parker Road. What if we made it into a really nice music in the park venue type of thing with food carts, paved gravel parking lot, and some bigger bathroom and a nicer stadium area and kind of a gathering place for year round, but it's not really related to the rec center concept. So that's kind of, to me, that's a interesting idea. When I go out and have talked to folks about it, just floated the general idea of, what do you think of making it into bringing some food carts in and making it into a nicer space? I've gotten some positive feedback on it, but we haven't really solidified what the idea would look like, what the level of priority is. But I do think it's an interesting and exciting idea. And on Oppenlander, I'm not sure if we know the timeline right now on when we have to make decisions about that and how to get to the costing of what that would look like and the options. I don't know if John or Megan have any updates on that particular topic at this time on Oppenlander.
I don't
Okay.
really, yeah.
And Councilor Bright, please.
I was just going to say the concept that you were just talking about to create bigger gathering spaces within the community. And I think that could be done at a much lower cost, obviously, than the big
Oh,
bells and whistles,
Thank
rec
you.
center that we were talking about
I
previously.
I forgot to get in the cost. I mean, we already own that property and it could be as little as $2 million for that. I mean, we that's where we got to get into. If it comes out of this as a priority, we can get into some more specifics with it. I know Megan's been working on that a little bit and thinking about it. But those are my thoughts. Anything else to add?
Well, so for this one, we thought, if you look on this page, we took that across and thought that probably bonding is the source that you would use for this. So thinking about sense of scale connects to the rates that we put there on the bond page, which is also on the back side of this chart. We thought about listing grants almost everywhere. Grants are obviously a possibility in a bunch of these categories. We ended up listing them mostly in these two amenities because they felt like the places where grants were most likely. You're not going to get grants. Some of the categories you have no chance of really getting any significant grants at all. You're not going to get grants for general fund staffing. A lot of the other categories, loans would be it and not grants. So just as a reminder that there are some grant opportunities out there.
Yeah, so impact, you guys, does the council have any thoughts on impact around voter concern or just alignment with any, mission, goals, other strategic goals you have in mind?
I feel like parks are popular. And
Okay.
and I do think that there would be alignment on a, I'm not sure the scale of ask. I don't know if it's 10 million, but maybe a little bit less, but something around improving our parks, acquiring a park space and then building something making a gathering space at Tanner Creek.
Would be desirable to voters?
Yeah, I think it'd be desirable. I mean, we haven't done any polling on it, but I think that's definitely, I mean, people love music in the park as an example. So I think it could parlay into our overall agenda of making the city a better place.
Okay. Other thoughts on impact? I generally agree with that.
We can just, maybe for each thing, should we just go around each counselor? I mean, I want to make sure everybody feels like they can share their thoughts. Counselor Bright, then we'll go to Kevin.
I agree that parks tend to be very popular. I also know that there are some income restrained people in our community, and also because of the topography, having a wonderful, incredible gathering place up at the top of the hill could be challenging for people that live, say, in Bolton or Robinwood. because it would be more difficult for them to get there, particularly because we have limited transit to get them there. And I have talked to people in the Robinwood neighborhood that said that when we were originally talking about the rec center, that
Yeah.
they would vote no if there wasn't a bus or some kind of mechanism to get them there.
Understood. Counselor Bonington.
One of the things this does not have in common with the other items in front of us is that it doesn't necessarily need to happen immediately. This is something we could lay the groundwork for and have a plan that kind of unfolds over the next 5-10 years or something along those lines. So even if it doesn't become an immediate priority, it could still be something that gets done over time. Just how I look at it.
Counselor Groner, do you have anything to add on the topic?
No, I agree with what was said, and I think I've made my comments. Thank you.
Thanks.
So around voter support, just kind of referencing that it's a desirable thing, but also recognizing that transit options would be required.
And of course, I'm thinking of Megan when she says, she said in the past that it's park space is limited. So like, land is an valuable asset, and it can go away. Megan, I'm trying to summarize your thoughts about how important parkland is. There are some certain topics that, where if you don't jump on it at the time, it can be, the land is gone forever. So that is a.
What about, we talked just kind of in general, people support parks, but does the council feel like there's a clear understanding of where voters are on this? Or do you feel like there's more research needed or additional polling needed?
It depends on.
Well, quantifying how much the voters are willing to pay is something we do. need to
Okay,
explore.
that council
Yeah.
would be interested in.
Kind of on both the topics we've discussed under parks, it feels like there's not a clear, we haven't as a city come up with what the proposal is to the community if we're going to do work at Parker Road or the Oppenlander site. So there's we have to do some more work on those topics to kind of get the understanding of what the.
So additional scoping would be needed.
Yeah.
before You guys would feel ready. Okay.
Doesn't necessarily have to be a ton of work, but just we have to have some sort of proposal. We're going to move forward with that. Councilor Groner.
Getting back to Oppenlander, I'm wondering, are we waiting for ICON to make a proposal or are we proposing something to ICON?
I think the next step is a conversation with council about where you want to take that. I think we could bring them in the room, have another conversation, and work it out together, be my thought, is the next
Thank you.
step. They're in that due diligence phase now, so the conversation is now in the next couple of months.
Okay.
We thought it would be useful to council to have this conversation about where this general topic falls on your priority list so that you could be more informed coming into that conversation about what you want to do. How are we doing on our 17 minutes?
Good. We have about 6 left. And I was curious. So thinking, we're hearing we would need to quantify what voters would be willing to pay. So there's some additional polling that's needed there. And then just scoping of a proposal on staff's end and council's end. But then say if you get that council capacity, level of council support, does the council feel like they'd be willing to, in general, not knowing all the details yet, but support a campaign for this topic? Or TBD?
Which is the question is, would
Just
the,
kind of like what would be council's commitment to dedicating some capacity for something like this?
I'm open to it. I mean, I think it's,
Yeah, just trying to get a general
Yeah, no,
sense
I
of
think
like
it's a good-
openness to this particular priority.
I think it's, I'm personally definitely open to it, but open to the thoughts. I mean, I know that it takes, especially when you're talking about ballot measures, the city council does have to take a leadership role along with
Mhm.
Parks Board and other community members to fundraise and do the outreach. Because then
Yeah.
once it gets referred out, the staff can't be involved. So
Yeah.
beyond providing objective information.
So council, Parks Board, and community would need to be engaged.
I think in this case too, based on your earlier comments, since there's more definition needed in this category, the question is also, do you want to spend council time working on that definition? And how does this topic compare to others as we go along? So just keeping it all in mind. You probably have to come back to this at the end and think about it, because you're not going to be able to do everything all at once.
Yeah, I would think this particularly would play into your prioritization efforts, knowing that if that's something, if this is a higher priority for you, this would give staff direction on what to do next. Other thoughts on this? When we think about, anybody else have anything to say on council capacity? Or just any additional considerations?
I think from my perspective, I would certainly be willing to engage with the community to find out their response before I would be willing to say, this is what we want to do, what do you think?
Community engagement is key. Thank you for bringing that up, Counselor. Appreciate that. Counselor Bonington, you haven't looked like there's something on your mind over there. Go ahead.
Yeah. So for all of these, I am ready to get behind all of them. So I have capacity.
We should put your
yeah.
name at the
You
top.
can just put me down for all of those.
Okay.
And likewise, with a caveat, the community, based on literally hundreds, maybe even over 1,000 conversations at this point, would be behind all of them. The thing is, probably not all together. And so that's why we're here, figuring this out. But I feel like that one might be one of the most dependent on how it looks.
Yeah.
The others are all more like straightforward. People would accept them as they are. That one probably needs to be structured carefully.
Okay.
Thank you for that.
Other questions, comments about this particular priority?
I think, my comment on this is I'm excited about engaging the community, working on these two projects, especially the Parker Road property, because it's kind of an underutilized site that we own. And I'd be interested in kind of thoughts on how to, move the ball on it. I know we've talked about it a little bit internally, and I'm that's why we're here today. So I'm just putting a plug in for being interested in continuing to talk about this.
Sarah, so far I've really only heard mention of Oppenlander and a possible project at Parker Road, and maybe that's the way we think of this right now. If those are the top two that are coming to mind, rather than other parks acquisitions elsewhere or improvements elsewhere, if these are the two that are really on your mind, let's describe it that way.
So a focus on Parker Road and
I mean,
Oppenheimer?
I just work here, so.
You do. Which is why you know about Westbridge, something that may come up in the next 10 years. And then the good old Bolton Fire Station, which is not necessarily a park, but would require some sort of improvement. It's going to cost money to deal with in some form over the next, I don't know how urgent it is, but.
And related to that, Megan just reminded me of the non-motorized boat launch at Willamette Park, which is a popular project, but not fully funded. So there are other things, and that's.
So are we including the focus on other things, or is the focus for when we think about readiness and giving staff a little bit of direction on what to do next? Quantifying what voters would be willing to pay, and really the additional scoping, is the focus on these two, or would the focus be expanded?
I would like to expand the focus a little bit, particularly things like the non-motorized boat launch, which is at an existing
Yeah.
facility. So there are facilities that need some improvements to make them function for the community, you know, up meeting the community's desires.
Appreciate that. And also helps generate buy-in a little bit if you have some projects around the city. It's all going to come down to the cost, I think, and that the overall
Yeah.
bottom line.
And I would comment, you know, the old Bolton Fire Station is property owned by the city. And that is included in one of the focus areas for Vision 43. And I think that it's got a higher and greater use maybe than just calling it some kind of a park and it doesn't require acquisition. So
That's, which one were you referring to?
the Bolton Fire Station on Highway
Bolton
43.
Fire Station?
Yeah, so it's not really part of this parks acquisition discussion in my opinion.
On the
Okay.
other hand,
I guess
it
we'll
could
go
be
there.
sold.
It goes somewhere else?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, you guys can, oh, over here, parks and city facilities. Okay, I'll put a note there. Fire station, just put it down here for now. Okay,
Shall I make the segue over to waterfront area projects?
yeah, let's go to, are we ready to go to the next one?
Any other burning thoughts on parks acquisitions? Councilor Bonington, close us out, please.
I might suggest that we remain open to breaking this off from the rest of these in some way and viewing this as both a longer term goal, but also somewhat separate, these being more infrastructure, urgent, budgetary things, and this being something we can take our time with a little bit more, maybe.
Yeah, I think we'll see how that manifests when you guys get to your prioritization. Okay, I'm going to set the timer for our next one. Keep us on track.
So at your previous work session, a few different projects sort of with the waterfront area theme came up. And similarly, costs aren't defined, scope aren't defined super well, but there's definitely an interest in having some funding source to implement the waterfront vision plan that you're actually going to be considering tomorrow night. And I remember there was some discussion about a little welcome area up near Historic City Hall, or there was other discussion about the ponds properties or trails in the waterfront district. So there were a number of different things that were discussed. I just wanted to, I thought it would be sensible maybe to break these out from the general topic of parks acquisition, but similar in theme. And again, we just decided to put the same budget down for this one as a starting point for discussion, not knowing exactly what it is, and the same funding sources, I think. You'll see, we're going to look a lot smarter as we go on the list because we have better numbers as we go across the board. But since this was discussed at your last work session, we wanted to make sure it was included here. And it may end up being a similar type of discussion to the one you just had.
All right.
Thank you for that.
Yeah, do you guys want to start with impact?
Make a comment.
Sure.
Please.
I was at a mixer a couple of days ago, talked to Ted Leibold, who I think you know well. And he suggested that there may be some transportation funding grants possible for a bridge that would connect the Tumwater and our waterfront project. And I think that would be an interesting project to explore. A pedestrian bike bridge across the river connecting the two developments.
That was talked about in the past too. I think Council President Baumgartner served on that work group that worked on that back during. Initially, that came around when tolling was talked about, and that was going to be one of the projects they tried to put in to help offset the impacts of tolling. But it would definitely be cool.
But apparently there is some metro money available for that. Well, metro access to state money for that.
Bless you.
Thank you.
I feel like this also kind of goes towards our urban renewal district, which is another funding source for waterfront projects. So that's kind of one of the main funding sources I see for this.
We didn't list it since it's already in
Yeah.
place,
I mean, it seems like this is,
but yes.
seems undefined at this point what the projects could be. I mean, we don't know if the trust is going to come to us with some sort of project needs or what the, what the process will be like for the waterfront overall.
And I learned from John a couple of days ago that the Blankenship development project is within the boundaries of the TIF. So that would presumably generate substantial revenue to support the TIF.
So I'm hearing more scoping is needed on this one. What else would the council feel like they want to do from a readiness perspective? How would you, what would help you feel ready to define funding or to elevate this as a priority? What else would be required?
I think that one of the big issues with the waterfront area is that the city owns very little property there. So it seems that any opportunity for property acquisition should maybe be prioritized.
Okay. Other thoughts, Kevin?
Yeah, prioritizing any opportunities that come up to acquire property is a key element of that. That's only going to be an opportunity that comes up once, I would think. So we wouldn't want to miss that, but I don't know how soon that'll be. One thing we might want to have a careful eye on is going after grants or other funding to remediate the toxic sludge ponds. However we can.
Remediate the toxic what?
Sludge ponds.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah, where do we put
Go
that?
ahead.
I think that's an important role we play,
Well, we
even
don't,
if we don't own them.
we don't own that property and it's DEQ's, Department of Environmental Quality's responsibility to make sure it's okay. So that's a bit more of a challenge, I think, to dip our toe in the water, so to speak.
Or in the sludge, maybe? Okay. So that would need to happen, but that's not necessarily city responsibility because you guys don't own it.
On urgency, I think this is kind of more of a longer term project.
Okay. Other thoughts on urgency? Does council generally agree this is longer term?
I would say absolutely, unless property becomes
Yeah.
available.
Yeah,
And then
that's the
if
key
you
point.
don't get it when it's available, then you probably don't get it.
You can put a subject to property, or an exception to the longer term
Yeah.
urgency statement that makes sure to acquire property if it comes available. Agreed.
So I think the private developers might sell us the sludge ponds very cheaply.
Then it becomes, do we want to take that on?
Okay. What about voter concern or alignment? Is this something that voters are like, feel any sense of urgency around or are beating the doors down City Hall, telling you of its importance?
I'm not sure they necessarily know about it on
Okay.
a wide scale.
Okay.
There's a core group of people who definitely know that things are taking shape there, but I think on the whole, this is going to be flying under the radar for a large swath of voters. So
except for some people who are very concerned about the wetlands near their property.
Right, that would be maybe about it. They'll find out, and the public understanding and knowledge of this project is going to grow exponentially over the next 5 to 10 years. But right now, I don't know that they all have opinions like they
Okay.
would about other things.
Any comments around council capacity for this particular one? Again, hearing that it's longer term, there's still more scoping needed. You guys kind of clearly expressed we're interested in acquiring property should it become available. Caveat of making sure that's something you want to do depending on the level of cleanup required.
So we'll be talking about the waterfront vision at our meeting tomorrow, but there are lots of steps that will take place after that, that the council will be involved in, and that would be some zoning changes, changes to the comprehensive plan, those kinds of things. So that also adds to it being a longer term project because all the pieces won't be in place. Once we have the vision, we'll know that's our guiding document to get where we want to go, but then we're going to have to change other rules and regulations to make that happen.
Okay, so I'm hearing the council's capacity should be spent completing this vision and then you doing the next steps that are outlined in your vision.
Which will also include, I believe, a lot of community outreach.
Okay. Is there general agreement around that? Or other thoughts?
I agree with that.
Okay. Anything else on this one? You guys ready to move on to the next?
Okay, the next one is the City Operations Center. In fact, the next three are all in the infrastructure category, all in the general.
4, right?
Yes, the next four. That's right. Thank
Okay.
you. And so on the Operations Center, for Sarah's benefit, council's been working on this with staff in recent meetings, and tomorrow night has a question posed about moving forward the project in a construction, towards construction. The current budget has it listed at $35 million, as the council has seen. The current staff recommended project level is 45 million. So as I mentioned in the staff report, we can think about this at several different possible levels. We can talk about how are we funding the entire general fund component. We could talk about how are we funding the 10 million difference between the budgeted amount and the current construction cost estimates, or we could talk about some other way of thinking about it. But council's pretty familiar with the design, the cost, the need of this project. It's been a council priority from some time, and now we're just trying to land the plane and ensure that we understand the funding for it. And so I didn't think I would spend too much time in my intro on this one, since you all have been queued up on this topic. But there's definitely, this actually wasn't discussed too extensively at the last of these meetings, but the budget need has been surfaced in the last, since then, really, in detail. So I think there is a question for council about how you want to go about this. So that's by way of intro. And Eric and Megan are here, obviously. I think.
Still here.
Still here.
I'll let you
And
know if
can
it's
answer
difficult.
questions about that number and about the design and about the funding components and everything. So there are, currently the funding is proposed to be divided amongst the five main components of the project: 4 utility funds and the general fund. And it's the general fund that's the biggest challenge, but several of the utility funds are challenged by this project.
Do we want to dive into the funding at this meeting, or?
I think it would be valuable, and it would help you prepare for tomorrow night,
Yeah.
I think.
Okay. Go ahead.
Well, let's just go around the table and start out and then we can, Counselor Bonington, go ahead.
All right, I'm gonna go big and go bold on this. And this actually takes us to the very end in a certain aspect. I think we should consider completely funding the operations center through a bond. I believe that gets us somewhat of the way. Maybe was it halfway to budget stabilization? If we take it out of the general fund entirely and fund it with a bond.
Can you clarify, are you talking about a voter approved bond
Mhm.
on a ballot measure?
Yeah. Right. And then alternatively, I don't know what a fee for that would look like, but maybe that's another option to consider. Part of it, all of it, I don't know. But I think that's something we should talk about.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's a piece of capital infrastructure that is going to last whatever, 50 years and should be depreciated over those 50 years. And therefore it should be basically a bond issue. And I agree. I don't think we should be cutting too many corners on it because I think we'll pay for that in the long run if we do.
Counselor Bright.
Lauren, can you remind me, originally, I think not in this budget, but in the prior budget, there was some reserve funds that were planned to be used for this, and if we bond funded the entire project, would some of those reserves, I know some of them would still need to meet covenants, but would some of those reserves be available for things like road maintenance and unfunded water and?
So currently in this budget document, we have about 540,000 every year for debt service in each one of the funds. And obviously environmental services has two components, so sewer and storm drain. So it has double, so it has a little bit of over $1 million a year. The parks portion, obviously, as Councilor Bonington mentioned, would probably go towards the stabilization of the fund. It wouldn't quite get us all the way there, but it would get us a little over $1 million a biennium. So
Can
was
I clarify?
that your question?
So if let's say you took the entire cost of the project and the voters passed a bond to pay for the entire cost of that project, then you would have all the funds that Lauren just described available in the utility funds to do projects and available in the general fund to do what the general fund does. And so
Yeah.
because you'd be taking the worry that we've been having recently is that in order to fund especially the increased costs of the project is that it just affects our ability to do infrastructure projects. And the general fund component really just pays for everything that Parks and Rec does, particularly parks in this case.
But still, each of the funds would have to have the capacity to take care of the debt service.
Well, the debt service would be from the bond.
Yeah, if we went out for a geo bond, then obviously the debt service would be coming from property tax money, so we wouldn't have to
Right.
use that 540,000 that we're currently planning on using as a full faith and credit obligation that we would have to pay for directly from those revenues of the funds.
You guys are currently at time on this one, but we had some extra time from the last one, so I'm
We
gonna
have to-
give the additional 5 minutes for this one, but we'll try to also just be thoughtful about how we move through some of these other topics too.
So you said $540,000. Is that an annual number? Is that the unfunded or the part that we're talking about, like that we need to come up with? 540,000 a year, basically.
So that was with when we were talking about 35 million. Now we're talking about 45 million. So that number would go up to about 700 and some thousand. I can't remember the exact number. If it was 45 million. The one thing that I do think that maybe Eric can talk a little bit more about this too, is that if we did go out for a geo bond, we would have to do that in May, which may push the project back, which could be an issue funding wise. I don't know exactly, but I know that one of the things that they were talking about is getting the timeline for getting started in this summer. And so I think that if we didn't know if we had the funding yet by May, which would mean we wouldn't, even if it does pass in May, we wouldn't be able to get the funding until like August. And that might push the project back a whole year.
So the thing that I've really been trying to understand in my head from the last meeting and coming in today about the op center is like, if you were to do a fee increase, I'm looking at this chart on attachment 2 of $1 generates 108,000 of annual revenue. So like what, $1 a month that is, what level of fee would need to be implemented to like meet the budget need for the project?
For the entire project?
Just, yeah, like the unfunded, kind of like if we were to take it out of the general, not the entire project, like not, I don't know.
So
Like the scenarios where you could have an FFCO, full faith and credit obligation that we pay for with, like maybe you take the general fund component out and we pay for that with a fee increase, that kind of scenario.
Well, I would need to look at each different scenario about, because I know that there's a topic on there of the streets fund taking 30%. Do you have that exactly? So how much would the general fund need if the streets fund, isn't it 560 something?
so we ran some numbers on that. We ran the math for a $2 fee, a $5 fee, $7 and $10. And I'll start with the $10 just as an example to answer your question, Mayor. Over the course of the loan, which we're doing 30 years, correct, Lauren? I think there was 30.
5, I believe.
Okay, 25. So that would, over the course of the loan, that would create $27 million. So we're still shy at $10 a month fee.
So in the council packet for tomorrow, at the $45 million project level, the impact is about $960 a year to streets, $560 to sewer, $560 to storm, $560 to water, and $560 in the general fund. That's total. That's not the increased amount. That's the projected cost. So that's roughly $2.5 million a year.
And that's with
in
streets
payments.
absorbing
Total.
30% of it, not
Total.
Well,
And
that
what
would
was
be-
the general fund?
560,
560?
560,000 a
And
year.
remind me what the streets fund was with that scenario?
960.
So just to get my concerns fully out there, I think passing a bond for the entire amount of the project would be tough. I saw what happened in Happy Valley with their recreation center. That's a project that got really strong community excitement. They had a super strong campaign. They fundraised over tens of thousands of dollars, and it went down 75 to 25. And I'm just worried about what would happen if we put this on the ballot when this is an essential project. Not a lot of folks know about it. It's not as exciting as a rec center. It's more important than a rec center because it's the whole base of our city services. And so if you put it out to voters, you're giving people a choice to say we don't want to fund this project when we have to have this project as a city. I just think I'd rather explore at least in the initial stage what the cost would be as a utility fee, because I think it's more of kind of a project of that nature, given how it's an essential service we provide. It's like not having a police station
Well,
or
a
something like that.
$6 fee in the park for parks maintenance would cover the parks portion per year. $6 a month fee.
That would cover 560. Is what you're
Mhm.
560,000. So if you had a six extrapolating from your statement, if you had a $6 fee for general fund,
Yes.
that would free up that much. Okay.
So from an urgency perspective, I'm hearing this is essential.
Yes.
It's essential, and we're getting ready to approve the contract. I think we're being asked to do it tomorrow.
And then, but from an
So-
impact perspective, voters' concern about this is it's not like a widely known thing.
I disagree. I think they could become very concerned about it if we told them to be concerned about it, because Westland voters are very logical and very pragmatic, and they trust us. So we have those things going for us that if we come out and say, this is very important to support, I don't know, I'd stake my reputation on it. They'd support it.
I kind of think it's like replumbing your house versus painting your dining room.
Mhm.
You don't see the replumbing and it's a, you know, so things that people don't see, they doesn't rise to a high level in their minds. You know, I can say the same thing about funding drinking water. You turn on the faucet, the water comes out. People don't typically pay attention to everything that goes into making that happen. It's not as visible. And as the mayor said, you know, something like a rec center, everybody gets all excited. Oh, this would be great. I could go there. But this is something that most of the community won't see. It'll benefit them. It'll benefit them every day, but they won't necessarily see it.
We are at our time for this one. Let's hear from Counselor Groner and then decide if maybe we want to come back to this.
I think an argument can be made. First of all, some of the pictures of the existing operations center, I think are pretty devastating. But also, I mean, make the case for employee retention because people working in a poor environment are not happy people, I believe. And efficiencies. I think the case can be made. I mean, people do understand that plumbing needs to be replaced sometime in a house too.
I agree with both of you. I think it could, strong arguments can be made about public safety, the employee retention, et cetera, in a bond measure campaign. I just think it's something that could be hard to get a majority of people to support, but by putting it out there, we're sending a message that there's an option here about not having it. We have to have it because of the nature of the project and having a place for public works to maintain the streets, store all the winter supplies, et cetera. So that's where I'm at, but respect your opinions, and also, it's something, if the council wanted to, we could put it out to a bond measure. It'd require an extensive campaign. On the council capacity, I mean, that would require a lot of bringing people up to speed. And so I would, if you had, my preference would be to just at least take a look at what that monthly amount would be on a fee.
If I can add real quick, to Lauren's point, we're looking at a dry season start this next spring, summer. And so I don't think we have the opportunity to wait for voter approval if we're to pursue a bond. And then, so I think we have to move forward with the utilities in the general fund. I don't know if it's an option to then still go ahead with the other one to then reimburse those funds, but I don't know what that would look like. So.
I don't know if I said it loud enough, but I'm also completely in favor of doing a fee or bond. But if a fee gets it done, and we can look at doing a large enough fee to take that out of or a large enough fee that we could then accomplish the same financial goal of stabilizing the budget. That would be preferable. So I don't know what a fee for the full 45 million would look like, but that's kind of the bold idea I'm thinking we might want to look at.
Well, rough sense of scale, if $5 gets you 500,000, then you need 2.5 million, you need 25.
We need like about 3.2 million, I think.
Is it that much?
Yeah, I think because it's 960 in the streets fund and then 560 in
That's right.
all the other ones. So 3.2. So yeah, no worries. So 3.2 divided by 1.
Okay.
It's
So-
about a $30 a month fee for the whole thing.
But again, it wouldn't necessarily need, you could. You don't have to cover the whole. Some.
Okay. We can come back to this one. I feel like we covered the main points of it.
Appreciate that. Thank you for facilitating it.
Yeah, we'll keep moving and then,
Be faster.
yeah. Okay. All right, let's talk about the drinking water line.
Okay, so drinking water has been a council priority for some time. The cost that we included is simply the next 5 years of unfunded capital recommended by the Water System Plan. That doesn't mean that the absolute number. You could look at deferring all of that. You could look at funding some of it. There are more projects beyond the timeline. We just wanted to give a number that we had that matches to a specific set of projects. So these numbers can be tied back to the Water System Plan, tied back to our capital improvement plan, and early fund. So it wasn't discussed in a lot of detail at your last meeting, because we wanted to make sure it's still on the list due to being a council priority for several years. And you already know the way that you fund water projects. We either fund water projects with a fee or a bond, generally speaking, or the very, very rare grant. But they're pretty uncommon. And so the issue here with fees is the charter limitation that makes it difficult for us to eat into a project backlog because of the rising annual cost just from cost of construction, and we're not permitted by the charter to go higher. We are working, and I have had a specific update, but Haley Klein is working with Southport to understand that bifurcation, remember the bifurcation issues, could the Southport water supply be separated out to the city's water costs, is how we think charter cap. But we wanted to keep this issue on the table. We obviously have water fee, we have water funds, we have projects happening, we just completed some projects, but we continue to fall slowly behind. So this seems like it's important to keep on the list.
So from a sense of urgency, I'm hearing slowly falling behind.
How would you describe it?
Yeah, I mean, just as an example, we just completed our water master plan this last year. And they identified over the 5 years, almost $13 million in projects, basically high priority projects. And we, in this year's 5-year capital plan, we have almost 8 million budgeted towards those projects. And so, I mean, that's a gap of 5 million already.
You said 13 million?
Yeah,
Okay.
correct.
And so this one obviously ties to the last discussion because part of the water fee is going now to the operations center. So the more that has to come from the fee, the more it limits our ability to do the infrastructure.
Okay. Yes.
I want to say, in the spirit of good news, or at least solidarity, this seems like as I'm looking at this big chart and all the things, it's a lot. It's a lot to think about. It's serious. But I don't think that it's, even though we are at a lower rate than a lot of other communities, every community around us is dealing with all of these same things. And so you're not alone. I don't want it to come across as like, man, West Lynn, we are really the worst, because we're not. We have a couple of things that are that are a little unfortunate in terms of our structure. But if you were to go to the city managers or the mayors of Oregon City or even Lake Oswego, right? Their community has needs, demands that are unfunded, whether it's road maintenance or parks or rebuilding the pool in Oregon City, all of those things. So just to keep us on a, it's not just us. And I think that's important to remember.
I had lunch with Mayor Beaverton 2 weeks ago, and they're having the same exact conversation. Do we do a levy? Do we do a fee? How do we keep our staffing? It's happening everywhere right now because of the 5 and 50 limitations. Good.
Yeah, we did a
good
similar
point.
exercise, matrix, cards, placemats, the whole thing just last week. So, okay, Metro,
Oh, wow.
yes, or 2 weeks ago. But yes, there were more last week. They're happening every week. You guys are definitely not alone.
Thanks. So on drinking water funding,
Yeah, so it's a council priority set from a sense of urgency perspective. I heard slowly falling behind. And then just a few nuances. You fund it with a fee or a bond. You've got some charter limitations there, but it ties to this one because the more you do for a fee here, it limits your ability to do some of these improvements. So other things you guys would like to add in this area around impact or urgency or readiness?
I can add an easy readiness thing is that we have a capital plan. We know the projects, we have the cost projected for the project. So in terms of these like scoping, we know what the projects are and we know what they cost.
Other counselor thoughts? Again, this one feels a little more straightforward.
Yeah, just, can I get some indication of what some of the risks are if we don't do some of these projects? Are we talking about not getting water or disaster planning is all cracks?
I mean, there's always the chance of an emergency. You know, we just had one last couple of weeks with the sanitary sewer issue. So you always risk that. But honestly,
For that emergent, so the risk is that you'd have to do emergency repairs. Are those more expensive than a
Yes.
planned out
yes.
improvement?
With the 30% going towards streets, if we're funded from utilities for the ops building, with that scenario, at 30% and then the 560 across the other funds, water fund is able to maintain what we have budgeted for this 5-year cycle. Now, we still are in a deficit with the master plan projects called out, but there is no trade-offs as far as this year's budget. Does that make sense?
So Eric, would you say that speaks, if that was to play out, to this possibly being council having more time to sort out water system long-term project needs?
Yeah, I think so.
Could be a priority, could speak to priority.
Okay.
And also, if this is a revenue bond, there are expectations of spending that money within 3 years. I mean, you don't have to, but you know, there's arbitrage requirements. And so it's not likely that we would want to necessarily do a revenue bond for the entire amount that we need for the projects over the next 5 to 10 years because we don't have the capacity to do those projects and we wouldn't be able to do them quickly enough.
Oops, sorry.
So for that one we'll put down here. Okay. Other comments, questions on this one?
I personally would like to see a charter amendment to remove the 5% limitation. To me, that is extremely arbitrary. And it would be really nice to look at a rate plan that ignored the 5% to see what we would really need to do to the water rates to be able to keep up. But a charter amendment would have to go to the voters. And I don't know their capacity, their taste for removing what I think they feel is a safeguard.
I'm supportive of that as well. I think there's probably a better metric than 5%. which is arbitrary, as you said. And there's probably a real number it could be tied to that better reflects the realities of it. So it's what I would prefer. So
Well-
I'm very supportive of that.
And to me, just having that in the charter doesn't make sense. And I believe the Utility Advisory Board is going to be looking at a rate study to see what it should be, and then we can talk about how we might go about communicating to the residents.
The history of that is very interesting too. You can learn something from it, which is in the late 90s, early 2000s, the city council raised the water rates by like 110% or something around that. They doubled the water rates, and then their voters did a initiative petition to put that in the charter to basically cancel the water rate increase and try. So I appreciate what we're doing here today, talking about how to phase things in over time and have a financial plan. I think it's important to not do it all at once, as we've talked about. So
That's what happens when you do it.
Yeah, that's exactly.
Okay.
Anything else
But
on?
those numbers also happen when you don't do what you need to.
That's very true. I'm sure the projects they were funding with that were important at the same time. It just resulted in an undesirable.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the thing that so many cities find themselves in, is you get into this mode of not planning ahead, and then you're doing emergency repairs, which ultimately is costing the community more money to do it this way than to be more strategic. Okay, I know, it's such a light topic. All right. It is 10 a.m. Are we ready for a break? This feels like a good spot for a break and maybe a quick stretch? Or do you
Perfect.
guys want to plowing ahead?
Well, I think
Quick break? I heard
we
quick
can
break.
take a 10-minute break and
Let's go ahead and take 10 minutes, and then we'll come back and pick back up with pedestrian.
We're in
and bike
recess.
safety. How you doing?
Good. It just some of it is kind of small, so I'm like,
Yeah.
I knew it was closer and that helped.
Okay. I'm gonna run to the restroom, which I think is out here. A
Next up,
a favorite topic.
bike and pedestrian safety. Yes, a favorite topic.
What's that? We're for it.
We're for it. We are for safety. This, again, a topic that council has talked about several times in 2025 and even earlier. We have a transportation system plan that has a list of needed primarily pedestrian infrastructure, I would say. What we're talking about here is things like sidewalks, improved crossings, in some cases, maybe the push button activated lights, curb ramps, a variety of things that make it easier and safer to get around town. We have done some projects over time using our existing transportation revenues and the previous 2018 general obligation bond, but the city has no dedicated source of ongoing funding for pedestrian safety projects. And Council Eric has talked to you and Clark and the Transportation Advisory Board about a prioritization of traffic safety projects. And we proposed in this memo that if you had an ongoing source of $1 million a year, that might represent a manageable amount of actual design, communication, and planning work, bidding work to actually be able to do in the course of a year. And it would allow you to make some progress against the city's backlog of projects. Again, the Russian nesting dolls in the memo here, you can have that explanation, or you can click on the April packet and get the full list of projects and priorities. But this is a council, this is an item that council wanted to discuss further, and so we wanted to make sure it was on here. The typical way you would fund safety projects is either through a bond, which would give you a big chunk of funds to meter out over time, as we did in 2018, or an ongoing source, which would be ideal, and allow the city to just do projects for years and years and years until you were at the state that you wanted the community to be. So that's the quick backstory on this one. Eric, anything to add to that?
I was just gonna throw in there that is, with $1 million, for examples, so you have an idea on what that would get us. That would basically be another Cedar Oak sidewalk. We would, to John's point, the flashing crosswalks, the RRFBs, those are in the neighborhood of, with design and construction, 250 to 300,000 each. So you could say we get 3 of those somewhere, just as an example.
So you're saying that one of those flashing lights costs $250,000?
Yep.
Oh my gosh. People always request those, and if only they knew that cost that much.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah. Yeah. By the time you do the design work, the construction with the electricians, the concrete work, because you always have to redo the ADA ramps. Yeah, it's
Wow.
it's not an easy one.
So I guess the question that I have is like, what are on this topic is what are our options? Is the option kind of a sounds like bond or a fee?
Right. So
But the bond is kind of a one-time injection. The fee is
exactly
annual.
And Eric had brought an example. This was maybe at that April meeting. You brought that example from Milwaukee where they passed a fee.
Yeah, and so I've got my estimate here. They had for single family homes, $7.11 per month. Multifamilies a little bit less, $5.71. Commercial is on a per trip basis. I don't necessarily know what that is, would generate for us. Elderly care and low income would be exempt.
So the question that because I brought this up with folks, neighborhood meetings or conversations with folks, I already pay a street maintenance fee. Well, street maintenance fee is to maintain what we have. And that's what it does, is really repair, crack sealing, overlays, that kind of thing. It's not at all a dedicated source of projects in this category.
Okay, I'll open up this conversation. We'll go around the room again. I feel like this is something I'm interested in exploring. I would love to kind of come up with a proposal. And get community feedback on it and see kind of what the reactions of the community to the idea of, providing some funding for pedestrian and bike projects around town. Because I hear about it all the time from different community groups, and it'd be interesting to kind of do a survey and hear from the community. When you talked about those numbers, Eric, are those for new construction, or is that for an annual fee on a single family home?
Annual fee.
Okay,
Yeah.
or a monthly.
Monthly,
fee,
I'm
probably
sorry.
monthly. So
I'm
I
sorry.
misspoke. I led you to misspeak. Okay,
Yeah.
thank you. And Councilor Bright, you've talked about this before. Go ahead, please.
Well, this is more of a long-term. I know we're still in the feasibility study for a tax increment financing district for Vision 43. And before we came up with the name Vision 43, it was about connectivity between the neighborhoods. If we had TIF funds in the Vision 43 corridor, which would be Robinwood and Bolton, we could do city projects like sidewalks and pathways that would connect neighborhoods with TIF funds, I believe.
Yeah.
And so again, that's more of a long-term look because we don't even have the TIF in place, but it seems like that would be another source of funding.
Thank you. Great point.
Okay,
Councilor Groner.
I think we could get the public behind pedestrian safety and child on their way to school safety. I mean,
Yeah.
I think it's hard to vote against that.
And this is the type of thing that could also be kind of we're talking about immediate needs, phased in needs over, more longer term. So this is the type of thing we could do some exploration with and, phase in over time as well to start building up, because it's crazy. We don't have a savings bank for pedestrian safety projects. Then people come to us all the time. In fact, just got an email last week from folks in Sunset. Again, asking for follow-up. What's going on with the crosswalks and flashing lights? And we don't get that all the time from different neighborhoods. So good to have generate some way to have a savings bank for
So-
these kind of things.
from impact perspective, hearing that the public would probably get behind safety, you guys get a lot of questions and requests on this front already. Longer term, could be funded by TIF. You guys already, from readiness, already have a list of projects, but would need to develop a proposal and engage around that. And we haven't heard from Councilor Bonington yet, but what haven't we covered? Or
Our Sunset resident, tell us what you think.
Yeah.
any other considerations or any thoughts on council capacity related to this one?
No, I mean, I think this, to a certain extent, was one of the driving factors in starting this conversation late last year. But in the face of all the others, I feel like it might be slightly lower of a priority than some of them.
Okay.
A lot of
Go ahead.
There are a number, there's over 100 projects, I think, that are on the list and unfunded and need to be funded and scheduled and all of that. But I guess just looking at the others, I have trouble prioritizing it above some of them.
Sense of urgency for this one feels longer term for you.
A little bit. I don't want to be flippant, but Sunset hasn't had sidewalks for 100 years, and I wonder if 5 more years will hurt it. But I do think we need a solid timeline and solid strategy for
Okay,
how
so from
that's going to get done.
from
when
readiness, we
that's
need
going to get
this
done.
timeline and strategy.
Councilor Bright had another comment. Go ahead.
I also wonder if we could reduce cost if we did some things like pathways versus curbs, gutters, and sidewalks in certain areas. And as you said, Sunset doesn't have sidewalks. Robinwood doesn't either. And historically, the Robinwood neighborhood has said that they don't want that, that they like the more rural feel of their neighborhood. However, saying that, there are a lot of new people that have moved into Robinwood, and many of them have younger kids. And so maybe that sentiment is changing. But historically, the Robinwood neighborhood, in the 25, almost 30 years that I've been there, has said, we don't want that. We don't want curb, gutter, and sidewalk. We want a different sidewalk or path kind of option.
I guess I should say that Sunset is very different in that they very much do want sidewalks and improvements there.
And I think making progress at the rate of 2 or 3 or 4 projects per year, I mean, shows we are working on it. Clearly, we can't do everything at once.
Okay.
One thought that came to my head is, if this city council does decide to go forward with a bond measure of some type, whether it be for parks or projects, you can add in another, you can have different types of projects in there. Like it could be a parks and pedestrian safety kind of thing where you pick off a couple of really high priority projects that we've heard from the community about and add that in to kind of kickstart the process, get some immediate funding as we're working to develop a funding strategy for long term. So if you had an injection of a few $1,000,000 to get some, for example, sidewalks or crosswalks on Sunset and some other places where folks have been asking for it, you could do that. So it doesn't have to be just a fee or a bond, but the bond obviously is just a one-time infusion of cash. I think Eric has a comment, then I'll go to Carol.
Just to add to that, I would say pedestrian safety, the crossings, has probably been the most frequent request that we get in engineering since I've been here. And to John's point earlier, when we started the discussion, without some sort of a fund for these projects, we have to continually pull from the streets fund, which unfortunately is in a deficit as well with deferred maintenance already. So that's the struggle and balance that we have to manage.
I mean,
Okay.
theoretically, you could have a few $1,000,000 of parks ask and a few $1,000,000 of public safety or pedestrian safety projects. And that could help even generate some support from folks. Councilor Bright, go ahead.
I'm also wondering if there's any Metro grant funds for any of this, particularly as we get through the Vision 43, that maybe it would qualify for a Metro transportation grant.
Okay.
How are we
Good.
doing on?
You've got like 2 minutes if you guys have any other questions on this one. Time to
Any
decide.
other comments on pedestrian and bike safety?
All right, let's keep moving then. Parks and city facilities.
Yes, parks and city facilities came up several times at your last meeting, so we wanted to make sure it was reflected. And you'll recall a big piece of the conversation was the city actually does not have a long-term facilities maintenance and replacement plan. So we are a little bit ad hoc when it comes to it. We have projects that we know about, but we don't have it defined. We don't have a program of investments over the long term for the city to think about. And the same thing applies to our parks facilities. And so the discussion last time was it would be nice to allocate some funds at least to developing those plans. And then I sort of using the same logic as in the bike and ped safety, it might be that $1 million a year, just as a sense of scale, a number to talk about, could be a manageable number of projects to accomplish if we had the plan. But as was brought up earlier and really applies all the way across the board here, anything that has to do with parks, we are tight in staffing on parks, as you know. So that ability to design, bid, prioritize projects is pretty difficult right now with the staffing that we have with one person in our city facilities department and Megan doing a ton of the work on project design. And so it's a pinch point for us, but it was an important conversation for you last time. And that's why it reflects here. Funding sources that we had listed, parks and city facilities, same kind of thing, fees and bonds. We keep saying the same thing. That's because there's not a lot of tools. This is one we know how to do. It's just about amounts. When we come back to staffing, I'll talk a little bit more about the parks maintenance fee. We have some ideas there. But for now, this is a capital conversation.
All right, impact, voter concern, alignment. Is this
I've
something
just
voter-
I've heard some talk about a facilities plan. And I was wondering if we have funding for that. That'd be a really good place to start, to just get a funding for some master plan for the city facilities and kind of you've talked about it in the past, strategic plan for all these capital and maintenance projects.
Yeah, I'm currently seeking quotes to find out how much that study would cost. But just looking at the budget currently, like if you look at all the facilities, there's $853,000 annually to maintain what we have. And that doesn't include the new operations building moving forward. So right now we're doing a lot of good triage and best planning that we can with all of our facilities, but we definitely need somebody to come in and give that holistic approach of our long-term deferred maintenance and replacement costs. So to me, that's a key thing before we can start planning how to long-term fund it.
Makes sense.
And just to add another number, like right now we have 120,000 set aside for CIP for this year. So you just look at long-term, we need to get a bigger picture of what our long-term maintenance will be. Yeah.
So need to understand what this plan will cost.
It's a great place to start, is getting some funding for the plan to take place, so we can then, in the long term, help meet the needs of that, whatever the plan shows. Any thoughts from city council?
I'm hearing this could be maybe, or inferring maybe more long-term, based on you need to have this plan complete first.
Yeah.
You need to fund it and complete that.
Um,
Nothing's on fire, right, today? No, okay.
Things are falling apart, but nothing's on fire.
Falling
Bridges
apart,
are
but we're not
coming
on
down.
fire, okay.
I used to be on the board of an HOA and we had a roofing fund. And every year we put some money into the fund on the assumption that every 20, 30 years, we'd have to replace the roof. I don't know, are we doing anything like that?
Currently, no, we don't have the funds to do that. We are also looking at doing something similar for parks, trying to decide if we don't have the current funding to do that same type of plan. I've got to get a quote for that work to be done, to look at our long-term assets, as we don't have a current asset management plan for our parks right now. So we're trying to decide if we're going to do that in-house, or if we were able to get the funding to pay for that study to be done. Came in at 29,000.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Councilor Bonington, Mr. Parks Board Liaison, any thoughts on this? I know it's important to you. It's hard to prioritize everything. We want to fund everything, but with limited resources.
It is important, and I think you might remember maybe 9 months ago, I had the thought that I wanted to meet with you and Jeremiah about what were all of the needs, and I think we sat there for 90 minutes and barely cracked them because there are just so many. It's that so we need to get a sense of what those are and probably circle back to this and have that conversation. But we also need to probably think pretty broadly about all of the properties that the city owns. McLean House, Sunset Fire Hall, obviously Bolton Fire Station, like we said. There's, as far as I recall, the roof up here is coming around for need to be replaced. So lots of things like that, and they're not cheap, but overall the buildings the city owns next to the land are the largest asset we actually have long term. So we need to care for them.
So I think we have some good immediate term steps on this, which is to get those,
Yeah.
figure out the funding for the master plans or for maintenance plans, and then we can
Mhm.
continue to talk about this and figure out a funding source.
Absolutely.
And I think that also leads to taking care of what we have instead of just asking for money for bright, shiny new all the time. And I think that's really important. And I think that's a message that would resonate with a lot of our residents.
All right, so voter concern, we need to care for and maintain our assets. We need to understand the needs first, so this is a little bit longer term. Anything else on this one right now? You guys ready to move to the next one? Stabilization?
Okay, let's move to the general fund staffing because that's what the last two categories are. One is stabilizing our existing service levels, and that's how I've been describing it. You've heard me say ad nauseum and Lauren say that our 5-year budget forecasts show a $9 million general fund deficit in that 5-year term. And if that sticks, then we're most likely going to be in a cutting mode around here. And so before we talk about adding staffing on the very last column, we need to make sure that we're able to stabilize our existing staffing. Now, some of the pieces that you have talked about here today offer the promise of doing that. So, for example, if we could offload all of the general fund part of the operations facility, that's in the neighborhood of $500,000 a year for the general fund. If we're thinking $2 million a year would really get us towards a lot of confidence about the future on the general fund budget, you know, $500,000 piece is a big piece, really big piece. We have another idea for the general fund on the park side. We've been doing research into the parks maintenance fee legislative history and come to find that, yeah, it's sort of in both. Come to find that when they adopted the parks maintenance fee, they the history there is they wanted to cover 100% of the costs of parks maintenance, and you know some of you know the history of how that parks maintenance fee came to be, and we have found that we are about $500,000 a year short of that right now. That we are expending $500,000 a year. If you think about all of the parks maintenance materials, services, and staffing, it's about $500,000 a year. So with an existing funding source that was created to cover 100% of the cost of parks maintenance, you could look at increasing the parks maintenance fee to cover that. And you've seen our numbers before. It would be about $5 a month. Is that what we think still, Lauren? I know you guys maybe did some more work after we talked, but that is one option. So if you can think about the parks, this parks fee and possibly finding a way to fund the general fund part of the operations center, that right there is half of the stabilization need that we've been talking about. So that's a pretty significant chunk. And I would strongly suggest that we look at both of those as pieces to getting us where we want to be. So maybe I'll just, Sarah, maybe I'll just do the general fund staffing really quickly as well, and then we can talk about them together. So we've talked a number of times about the components that might be in the most needed category according to our professional opinion and according to what we hear from the community. It has generally fallen into the realm of parks and police. We have representatives from both of those departments who can come up and talk about the need. But Lauren, the number that we included in the increased staff, in the sheet we gave you, we had four categories here. Public safety, patrol, traffic SRO were examples, parks maintenance staffing, the building and recreation staff, and then we had a category that included planning and building code enforcement, planning staff, communication staff. And so we sort of divided it up that way so that you could see. And I said we were going to get smarter as we went along. And the reason for that is we can put very specific costs to very specific staff. So we can give you pictures of what packages would look like and what you would get from it. And you have Chief and Captain here to talk about the police part of it. Megan and the other directors can talk about the other staffing. But Lauren, I think you have the spreadsheet open that shows what positions these numbers equate to. And if you could cover that, that would be awesome.
Sure. For the parks maintenance, the 330,000, that is a new natural areas parks program manager and a new parks ranger.
Sorry. You repeat that?
Yes, sorry. For the 330,000 for the parks maintenance, that one is a new natural area parks program manager and a parks ranger. For the recreation numbers, it's an additional building maintenance worker, which could be argued to fall under either one, and a rec coordinator 2 position. For the police area, the public safety, that includes a community service officer, a student resource officer, an additional traffic officer, an additional police officer, and an additional captain. And yes, one additional traffic and one additional police officer. If we needed more, then we could go up there. You know, they had mentioned up to 3 that they might need, but that's just including 1 in this number. And then the other area, the 695, is an additional communication staff, a new assistant planner, a code enforcement person, a new code enforcement person, and an additional outreach librarian.
Do we have a code enforcement officer right now?
Well,
That's a great question.
So as a matter of fact, we have a community service officer, but Officer Higbee does all of the code enforcement for the city. So she really is playing double duty. Her technical title is community service officer, but all code enforcement runs through her in the police department.
Thank you.
so some cities have a code enforcement officer who focuses on the kinds of issues that tend to come to the departments up here. Planning issues, building without a permit, erosion control kind of stuff. And would they make a distinction between that and the general enforcement of our municipal code? So you'll see if you look at all of these rows, the current estimate has both a CSO in police, so a second CSO would that be, and a code enforcement officer. This would be an ideal scenario, but there's other ways to get at that. I think if you tell me, but I think if you were able to put a code enforcement officer operating out of City Hall with the departments here, that would release the CSO's job duties immensely. Probably still not get to, there's probably still be a giant backlog in CSO even so.
Yeah, I think what you would end up having is I think it's clear by the number of calls that come in per year. And if you look at what we had last year was about 1,200 between animal calls, ordinance calls, nuisance calls. It's just too much of a call load for one person to do. So even if you had a code enforcement officer out of City Hall operating just and sticking mainly to things like planning, building, you're still going to have more workload than one person can handle, and you're going to need additional resources from the police department to collaborate, especially Nicola's, her institutional knowledge about how those investigations go. She would be an invaluable resource to a new code enforcement officer if that's the route that we ended up going. So keeping that and then increasing that down at the police department to a second CSO, the call load, I think, just demands that level of staffing is required to handle the number of calls that come in per year from the citizens of this city with those types of calls.
And then Captain, while you're up here, you might as well, the road that we have here includes those 5 positions that Lauren described. You've made a compelling case for really what you need is at least 3 patrol. And can you just remind us about that and about the need?
And is this one just, this is for this column? Okay.
Sorry to blend it all
No, it's
together,
okay. I'm
but I
just
think
trying
it
to-
really does connect.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, I think where we're at now, a minimum increase of 3 patrol officers is really what's needed at the police department. And I'll give you a piece of anecdotal evidence that's come up literally from, a current, like right now. You're always going to have people out on things like family leave, injury, training, all sorts of various reasons. Over the next 5 weeks at the police department, just based on the staffing levels that we have and then just the things that happen, we have over 500 hours of overtime that has to be filled in the next 5 weeks. I can do the math for you, but that's a lot of overtime hours per week. And because there are people who are out that create that overtime, the people who are left at the police department are the ones who have to fill that overtime. So what we're talking about is a lot of extra hours for every officer. We're talking about mandatory shifts that people are being ordered to come in and work. And so an increase in the patrol ranks just allows us more flexibility to absorb those they're not losses, but those absences that come up just as a part of routine work, right? Family leave, sick leave, injury leave, vacations, that type of thing. So we really, 3 officers would be minimum. If we had a 4-officer patrol increase, that would allow us on every single shift to have 1 officer level over minimum staffing. And that way we could give people time off, we could send people to training, we could do the things we needed to do without always going into overtime on every shift. That would be crucial. So, I mean, in a perfect world, we're looking at 4 patrol officers and a captain, an SRO, a traffic officer, and a CSO.
World.
And
Which is
each
how
one
we're
of
spending our entire day is perfect world, right?
and each one of those additional police officer, patrol officers is an estimate about 240,000 a year. So, if we needed an additional 2 on here, it's about an additional 480,000.
Better start planting those money trees.
Yeah.
Okay.
And that, of course, counts for all of the benefits and everything else that goes with it.
Yes,
We don't-
that includes
People thinking they make that much per year.
an annual, like the salaries, benefits, and then also a cost of training and also like a component of like a car, computer, stuff like that. So it is just an estimate, but that is including everything that it would cost to hire someone.
So to finish my part of these 2, the way cities typically fund staffing is obviously with our frozen base, but fees. Some cities, as you've already heard from us in the past, have adopted. We already have a parks fee. Some cities have a public safety fee. And some of our neighboring cities, Milwaukee just recently adopted a public safety fee. So specifically getting at this topic. And cities also staff funding with renewing levies. So you can pass a renewal levy. You have to vote it every 5 years in your community, but you can use that for very flexible spending on staff. So fees, renewing levy, really your main sources of funding staffing.
Okay. So for sense of urgency, this one, you have the deficit and the 5-year projection. So if you don't make adjustments, then you'll be looking at reducing service levels. And here, there's a minimum increase of 3 patrol officers to be able to reduce the overtime and maintain the service levels. But we talked about the perfect world scenario. Council? Thoughts on impact, like voter level of concern? Our community level of concern?
I have a quick question just to start out for John. When you talk about the budget deficit, like if we've been talking about kind of having a financial plan that has some phases to the elements of it, like so it's not all at once. What's the kind of timeline that where like if we were to generate some revenue to offset the deficit, we would need to have it in hand to like, is this the next budget or is this future years?
Lauren says now, that's totally true. Our current 2-year budget is balanced, right? But it it sets up a situation, if not addressed, where the next 2-year budget may not be possible to balance, and certainly the second one after that. And I think you're looking at going under our policy reserves in the next budget. You'll remember in the Budget Committee deliberations, we talked a lot about how we scrimp and save, about how positions are open for a little while. We save money that way. Departments save money on their every part of their budget where they can, and we often come in a little bit under. And our worst case projections about healthcare and contracts and PERS and the cost of electricity don't typically all come true. If all of those things roll our way, then we sort of skate through this one and are able to have a reasonable conversation about the next one. But most likely, some of those costs are going to be realized, and we're going to have to be looking at a not very fun next budget, starting work on that in a year.
Thanks. Just trying to get a
You're
sense of,
welcome.
no, it's a good point. I mean, and I've been, since I've gotten involved in the city in 2018, I remember talking in that budget season of we're going to have a deficit. So it's
I
good.
think it is a really important part of the answer. This budget we're in is balanced, and we will make it to the end of this budget, but it just sets us up.
I'm just asking for the sake of if we're going to phase in some revenue options to, like, what's the timeline on that? Because I do think it makes sense to phase it in if you can.
Yeah, I would. So yeah, I mean, it says deficit in 5-year projection. I think that's correct in the sense that it's our 5-year projection, but really it is in the next fiscal year 29. So that's the year that we actually aren't just under in our policy reserve, we actually have negative fund balance projected in that year. So that's a real problem, not just our reserves being under, it's actually our fund balance too. And so again, I think that one of the things is obviously is the earlier we implement, the more we can make up. So if we were to implement it this year, we have basically 3 years in that budget cycle to kind of get going towards reducing that deficit. Whereas if we implement it in a year or two, then we only have 1 or 2 years to make that up. So that is a big difference depending on how much the cost is of that fee or that local option levy that we could be collecting. And so the sooner the better, in my mind, but also obviously need to be thoughtful about how we do that, which is why we're here. So
Thank
So
you.
the fiscal cliff is fiscal year 29? That's what this
yes,
is
so
about.
fiscal year 29 is when we actually fall off. We dip below reserves in fiscal year 28, but 29 is where our fund balance actually dives off.
Okay.
I feel like this topic is so interconnected with everything we've already been talking about because, for example, if we're able to offset the general fund component of the operations center, that helps. So, if we're able to stabilize the parks maintenance fund and get back to legislative intent and cover the whole amount, that helps. So there's all a interrelatedness to the prioritization here.
I think that's what makes this really complex and why I'm glad that we're doing this and laying it all out is because there are so many connections. Like you said, the operations center, if we were to pay for that via another method than taking those monies out of those different funds, it changes a lot of different things. I mean, it changes how much money is coming out of the general fund, how much money is coming out of the streets, the environmental services and the water fund. So 4 items up there can be changed just by doing one thing. Some of them you have to do a couple things to change it. So it really is interrelated, and trying to find that balance of what will work is challenging, but also it's good to look at everything to figure that out.
Happy to open the floor up to council for thoughts on either the stabilization or the general fund staffing. I have thoughts, but I don't want to talk anymore. I want to have the others if they have any thoughts. Councilor Bragg, former CFO, go ahead.
So certainly the concern with funding things with the renewing levy is every 5 years, does it get renewed? And I feel like the direction that we're going, we're probably in a pretty good shape. I think it's extremely important that we tell the story of what we used the funds for and the benefit to the community. With all of these things that we're talking about using fees, I'm not sure I have kind of the whole idea of what is the combined total of all of those fees if we opted for fees and all of those things. So I think we said, an additional $7 to fund fully parks maintenance, but then we've got all these other things. So it would be good for me to know what that total is. I know we have a lot of residents that complain about their water bill when in fact it's not a water bill. It's a utility bill plus these other maintenance fees. And so I think we need to maybe do a better job of explaining to people what we are doing with their money, because for the most part, all of these things that we're talking about are people that we hear from the community or things that they desire, as far as, patrol officers and traffic officers. Everybody wants police on their street, slowing those people down, and you can't be on all the streets all the time. So I think we have good things that we're discussing. I think we have a significant portion of our population that wants these things. And it's just a matter of, if we go with the route of a renewing levy, we need to make sure that we can also tell people what we are doing with that money.
Thank you. Counselor, totally agree with that. And you've shared in the past the history of Westland's prior operating levy that passed at one point, I think, and then was withdrawn. So definitely need to make sure we track that and make sure if we do go that route, we can communicate the story. Counselor Bonington, do you have any thoughts? You look like you do, but
No, it's always been my intent that if we were to get a levy going, we would do an extremely good job of telling the story of what it's being used for, and have signs around town with cute little owls on them saying, this is funded with the operating levy money. So people remember that 5 years from now. Yeah, I think that's a pretty simple and straightforward approach to it. I also think that people in Westland largely recognize that they believe they live in one of the highest quality communities in the state, and they also probably recognize they need to pay for it. So this is maybe not a huge shock to have to propose to them. We just need to get the phrasing correct and get the total nailed down.
I just recall watching the news from the November ballots come in on TV, and a lot of different communities across area looking at different levies to do. They're having the same conversations that we are about this, and I always remember Happy Valley when every 5 years they go out for their police levy, and it says, if you pass it, you'll have a police department. If you don't pass it, you have no police department. So there's that people that gets to my point of certain things like parks and police and library, and they can the things that the community really see out when they're out doing things and interact with and those can really play well with voters. So I think it's important to make sure that our ask is, to the extent we go down the levy route, specifically tailored to community what needs and what we're hearing from them about, like police services. We want response times to come down, and we've seen them go up a little bit. And if we were able to get a few officers, as an example, that could help bring response times down. And in addition to the overtime staffing issues, I might want to be a police officer now that I know all this overtime's out there down at the police department. That's something.
Yeah, we're taking applications currently.
So anyway, that's kind of there's my 2 cents on this. I do think there's a community appetite for the services that we're talking about And it's just about making sure that we don't go, we're very thoughtful about how we would put something together like that and the timing and engagement process. Lauren, did you have a comment? And then
I was just going to comment a little bit to Counselor Brike's question about how much everything costs and what the fee would be. So I just put together a little projection of if we funded all the positions that we've talked about in the general fund, plus the 2 million of stabilization, that would be about $42 to $43 a month per utility customer. That's what it would cost to bring in about a little under 4.6 million a year, which is all those positions that we talked about, and then 2 million.
43?
Yeah, about $43 a month. So that is a significant amount to add to a utility bill that's around 150 right now. So it's a 33% increase,
that's the top line number, and we can always.
That would be, that would be that. We also had talked about a little bit about what the cost would be if we funded the whole operations center via like a utility fee, and that would be about $30 a month. So, and obviously, either way, we would have to shift things around and figure out what else needs to be paid for, if that makes sense. So.
From a readiness perspective, does council have any thoughts on what other information might be needed?
I think there's one important piece of context that we can consider, which is the fact that our school district just passed a $190 million bond in this this climate, this political economic climate.
But by a lower majority than the past foundation.
Oh, absolutely. But they still passed it. And what we're talking about is nowhere near that much money. And what we're talking about is perhaps more consequential than many of the things in that to people's daily lives. All of it's important,
Something
both their
for
things and
everyone.
ours, but yeah, we're talking about a fraction of it. So when you consider it that way, I think a lot of people would be on board with this.
Do they consider it a precedent, or I've already paid for the school board? Now I've got to pay an additional fee to the city.
Do you feel like there's more information needed? Like, is there polling or something related to this one?
I
Or
feel,
specific engagement?
the polling is a really good point, and when I keep going back to this lunch with Mayor Beaverton, but they're doing polling right now on different fees and levy price points and return on investment and things like that, and I think it's really useful. I don't know how much it would cost, but just to kind of gauge community priorities on, when you tell the story about current police department staffing and response times and things like that. And, how do we, would you be willing to pay X amount, and kind of figuring out a way to scientifically gauge that could be helpful. I don't know, but it's good for us to know.
We have the ability in a city of this size and with a community like this to greatly impact that public sentiment before doing polling. We have the opportunity to get out and talk to enough people to really move the needle on what that level of support would be. So I feel almost like we got to package this up, get our grand total, figure out how we want to divvy it up, and then begin the storytelling, the outreach, explaining what we need, why we need it, why it's so important, and then come around to polling and seeing where we're at and what we think we can actually get done. I don't know how long that process takes, and we probably don't have a lot of time to pull it off. But it is pretty straightforward to get out there, let everyone know the reality of these things, tell the story, and then figure out what we can actually do.
So Kevin, I'm hearing you say we need to package our ask and get out and engage people first before you would do polling.
I don't know that we need to have a nice, clean package with a ribbon on it, but we need to have a sense of exactly what all,
Like a general,
which of these things we're going to bring to everyone right now. I think we could all probably agree on those pretty quickly, but how much they all cost, and then we need to tell the story and explain why they're needed. And then we need to do the polling and figure out what we can
We need
actually
to
pull
poll
out.
An informed public.
Yeah.
on it.
Exactly.
I appreciate
We need to
that.
educate
Your
them
taxes raised.
because we have that ability. That's not something that maybe in Portland or even in Beaverton, they have that luxury of going out and educating their voters before asking the question.
okay.
Appreciate that. Yeah, we can do a little bit of legwork before we do the polling. I think that makes sense. Did you have a comment, Councilor Bragg? And I'm also thinking back to my lunch I had with Captain Rollins, where you shared a little bit about what Tigard went through, where they kind of had a bigger levy that went towards all of the different general services across the city, and then it failed, and then they went back and did one kind of targeted towards public safety, and it passed. So good learning from that. Thank you for sharing that. He knows the Tigard police chief and has been engaged in a good person to talk to about the public safety levy issues.
Is there anything specific to readiness related to parks and police? I mean, it sounds like you guys have done quite a bit of due diligence on this. Aside from what you just mentioned, kind of as a general theme.
No, I know we have high support for those things, and those are very easy asks. I mean,
Yeah.
if we could hold a vote tomorrow on them, I would wager that it would pass alone as a standalone item, but
I had a couple of the other considerations from parks after Otis was talking about his that might be something to consider. One of the positions we had was a management analyst / parks project manager. And with that position comes the ability to apply for grants that are out there for our playground replacements that I'm trying to tap into right now. So looking at how in our partnerships, Metro Local share. So just that position alone would help give the bandwidth for facilities as well. Because right now Jeremiah and I do all the contracting for that. That would really expand and help us move along further with funding opportunities. The other one is with the recreation programming potentially addition. We need to make revenue providing the programs that we do. And so being able to look at having somebody that could help us focus more on sponsorship. Right now, our halftime FTE covers events and sponsorship, as well as increasing our programming opportunities, which is a benefit to everybody, right? The community, as well as some of our revenue needs. So just a couple of things to think about.
So a lot of community benefit.
Yeah, a lot of community benefit.
And
Yeah.
opportunities to leverage additional funding sources.
Correct.
Okay.
Thank you for that. I kind of see this as a phased approach where we have a combination of the two different options. Like there's the option to do a levy and the option to do some fees to help with the operations center and to offset some of the staffing issues. So, and I think that's what other communities have been doing too, the combination, not just one or the other, so you don't have a fee increase that is basically like a pretty significant increase if you did a $40 a month fee. Councilor Bonington, you had your hand up there.
we have one other option, and I don't know if there are more like it, but I'm not going to forget to bring this up one more time. But removing the prohibition on dispensaries brings us some level of revenue, even if we never have a dispensary spring up in West Lynn. We really need to get on top of that and make that happen. I think the public appetite for that is pretty good. Have a lot of support for it, especially if the zoning never actually allows one to go in. But that's $40,000 to $100,000 a year we're missing out on, and we can't have any little things like that slipping through our grasp while we're having these conversations. So if there are more things like that, I feel like I would have heard about them by now, but that's an easy one.
From a staff perspective, I think you guys will do your prioritization exercise here in a moment, but once that's done, some of this conversation around readiness helps staff understand how to kind of take some next steps. So I'm wondering if there's any additional clarity needed on, like for this one, it's about maybe some additional scoping of a proposal and being able to really quantify what voters would be able to pay through some polling. Thinking about how you can get started on Parker Road. This one, again, additional scoping needed, but it's about, this one's really prioritizing acquisition. This one you guys are already down the road on. That one feels pretty straightforward. This one would be develop a proposal, timeline and strategy so that you can engage on it. Get the RFP out to get your plan done. Get out, like package up and some sort of a general ask, and then get out and engage on that, and then poll a more informed public. So anything else that staff, where you feel like you want direction?
Well, I don't think so. We're really looking forward to the prioritization exercise combined hopefully with some methods, and that will define our work plan. So if it turns out that whichever column is the top priority, then we drive that one towards the finish line. Almost all of them need a little more work in some way or another, or communications or polling, if that's what council prefers. I've often wondered if there were some things that maybe are just done and don't need polling, and focus the polling on the bigger ones. I don't know, but that's an entirely political discussion. It may be that you choose, it may be that you, like, if $5 a month addition to the parks maintenance fee is a tool, to me, that's about the smallest thing we're talking about, and could fall into the category of perhaps it's just a council action, but you tell us what the communication is. On the other hand, it could be that you put all of this together and we're polling about a whole bunch of things. So we need to know which ones you really want to be working on so that we can design the work program. I don't know if that answered your question.
Yeah, I think it was more just making sure that you're, as long as you have a clear sense of.
Well, I have a very clear sense of some of these, and some of them I don't. So for example, let's say that first column turns out to be the highest priority. I still don't really know what's in it. And so we would be our first priority would be to work with council to define that column. Right. So if it's going to be 4 things or 2 things or 7 things, we would start working on that. It would become our priority. And I mentioned this last time, but I think the council has this list of priorities that you adopt every year. This work will probably lead to a revision of your priorities for next year, or a refinement of those priorities, so that they would become my work plan and Lauren's work plan. And Danielle and Otis and everybody, actually.
Council, Kev, did you have something else?
Well, I think we would love to be able to snap our fingers and do the $5 thing, but there are multiple $5 things. We're getting to the point where it's going to be like a $300 a month resident fee if we were to do that, and that's not gonna fly. We don't need polling for that on the extreme end. I think the polling is really to tell us exactly where that threshold is that we can actually get through. Obviously, there are some things we can't go without, so we can't leave it up to being on a ballot. But this is all very interconnected and very, very dependent on each other. So we gotta get the columns organized and then see exactly how much people are willing to pass on a ballot. So that's where polling becomes valuable to me. But otherwise, we were elected to lead and make these decisions, and we need to tell people what our needs are.
I agree. My thoughts on the polling were mainly focused towards the levy, the concept on staffing, like just getting a sense from the community about what their priorities are with funding, and what would be the easiest to pass from the staffing standpoint, like parks, public safety, library, where, what's their willingness to pay for that also?
Are you guys ready at this point to do you want to do the prioritization exercise? And then we can have some discussion about the results of it?
Let's do it, because then it gives us a little bit of extra time too, because
Yeah.
this is kind of
You
the.
guys feel, it seems
here
like
comes
you're
the
at a,
moment.
it seems like you're at a point where you're ready. Ashley, do you want to help me put a second sheet of paper and I'll get their stuff passed out? Just go right over it. Yep. Okay, so on your cards here, I'm going to pass these around. Again, we color coded them to be amenities, infrastructure, and services, and your names are on each set so we can see who ranks. There's no anonymity here. I'll just put Mary's here for now. Go Captain Bike, Mr. Bonington, and Mr. Grummer. Okay. And what we'll have you do is just, again, 1 through 8. I'll make some lists here, and I'm just going to ask that you just place them in highest priority at the top and put them down. Ashley and I will be giving you guys some tape to put on the backs of your cards, and that's how we'll get them up on the page here. Mhm. You want to just keep 4 of them, so just 8 pieces of tape on each leg, and I'll put some columns up. Yeah. Okay. Okay, whenever you guys are ready, you can bring your cards up and go ahead, and there's tape down here you can grab and just tape them up in your order. Yep, whenever you're ready, there's tape up there, and just tape them up in a list, top to bottom. You got it all figured out?
Well, see, some of them are combined, like the general fund, it's hard to separate them out.
It is, yeah, so when you think about
General
Let's sit down and wrap up our conversation now that we've got all the things up here. All right. You guys have a lot of, just at a glance, pretty consistent across the board. Replacement of operations center and stabilization of existing staffing are rise to the top. And we still need to get Mary to weigh in on this as well. And then we can put together, we'll have the final results and then we'll do an aggregate so that you know, yeah, what that looks like. But thoughts as you all look at it? I think I was just talking with John while you guys were doing the exercise. Last time it felt like a heavier emphasis in our discussion on the amenities piece. And it was still an important part of the discussion today, but I think the sense of urgency around some of the other things that you discussed today helped those rise higher on the list. Just my observation. Other observations? Reactions?
I put the operations center first, primarily because we could do full faith and credit and we could stay on the timeline to get the construction to start this year, which I think is really important. And then I put the stabilization of existing staffing as the second highest priority. I think that we've had excellent financial management in the years that I've lived in West Lynn, and we haven't really had to lay off anybody, and a lot of other cities had. But we also are very, very lean. And having worked for organizations that were not at all lean and organizations that were, it takes a lot more coordination and effort to keep things going as smoothly and as well as they do here. So I think ensuring that we can keep our limited staff is really a high priority for me. And then the reason I have the parks acquisition as kind of the third thing is when we're talking about property acquisition, the property is only available until somebody else buys it and does something with it. And so if we have opportunities, I think we need to try to jump on that.
Okay. Other comments? I think this gives staff an idea or some direction on how to develop a work plan around the next steps on some of these. Questions? Well, I don't know if there are any questions. I think you have enough.
To hear more comments about the timeline, like what is a timeline thought and what do the mechanism thoughts look like for these?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's important to realize that not all of these could even happen immediately. So it's completely okay to be strategic and lay these out over a number of years. We can plan several years ahead about how we're going to pursue some of them now because they're very urgent, and maybe a couple of them in the next year, and then a couple of them in the year after that. But we can space them out. We don't need to jump on all of them all at once. We don't only get one shot at this, so we can take our time a little bit. But I feel like the higher priority ones that we've all agreed on, and the ones that are kind of fleshed out and have numbers and items attached to them are probably the ones we go forward with immediately.
And I agree on the thinking in terms of strategy. If we immediately increase the parks fee and add an extra $5 a month to the parks fee, then if we come back a few months later and want to do the next and the next, so do you do one at a time? Do you do one big ask, of kind of putting it in place and people get used to it right away? So those are some strategic things that we need to talk about before we implement any of the fee additions.
It'd be a mistake to bundle all these things. in proposition.
And I like the idea of like phasing in fees over time. Like I think we've talked about that at South Fork a little bit, where you kind of they can gradually increase so it's not too big uh, of a hit at one time. On my list, I had a bond on parks acquisition / improvements like at the Parker Road property, and maybe even combined with knocking off a couple of high priority pedestrian safety projects to kind of get an infusion of cash for that. I don't have a dollar amount in mind, but not too big. We don't want it to balloon too big to where it fails, but something like that. I don't know if it's possible to do that in May, but that, that timeline comes up, all of a sudden you're in February for that. On Operations Center and revenue stabilization and the parks fee, they're kind of all interrelated, because if you, as we talked about, increase the fee $5 to offset the general fund portion of the Operations Center, you're kind of accomplishing two topics with that. So I think we need to have further discussions about how to kind of go about that and phase in those things along with parks maintenance issues. And then on a levy, in my note, I have, within the next year, 1, 2 years, depending on ballot timelines and kind of how that could work, but really taking our time to engage, develop a plan on staffing and what positions would be in it, get the community priorities about what they like to see. Everybody wants code enforcement to be able to respond. Everybody wants good policing, fast response time. So, and, there's a library included a little bit. People love our parks maintenance, and we need another Jeremiah also. We only have one maintenance person, so that could take a little bit of time, but I think we could do some dedicated work, figure that kind of thing out and make sure we have our ducks in a row to go out and ask the community for that and have those conversations. So those are kind of my methods and timelines as in my thoughts. So does that help, John?
Well, that list from each of you would be incredibly helpful. So to match these priorities to tools and a general timeline, I think that makes a ton of sense. To say back what I just heard, possible small bond for parks and pedestrian safety, possibly in May.
John, do you want to go through each person's results and at least highlight like the top
If you want to go through it, yeah.
and see if there's general thoughts? Maybe all of you don't know exactly yet, but if you do, based on today's conversation, we can just note it up here. So for parks acquisition, I heard bond.
Yeah, and I'd caveat it also with / improvements to existing.
Okay.
And that's similar to Carol. I put mine up in that ranking just based on the timelines of potential opportunities.
And for these two, you're thinking fees?
Yes.
Or I'm sorry,
And then the second one would be
fees.
Well, it's a combination because you'd pay for the full faith and credit with fees. So maybe it's like FFCO / fee.
FFCO/fee.
It's paid, the full faith and credit's paid back by fees over
Yes.
time, some of which we can already cover, but some of which we have to
Okay.
make up. And the general fund staffing would be a operating levy. Pedestrian and bike, that would be, potentially in a bond for the initial, few $1,000,000 of infusion and then that, we've talked a little bit about doing some sort of fee, but that would require a lot more engagement and work from city staff and community over time. And those other ones
Further out.
a little further out, yeah.
Okay. Do these all match up? Okay. Okay. Anything more you want to add for some of the other ones that you have further out?
The one that's the general fund staffing could be operation levy and or fees.
Yeah.
Just down the road, as people say no, then what do you do? And then the water line replacement, seismic improvements. If we can get the, if we can get the, charter amendment removed, then we can do rate increases. But that one's a little bit, it is going to be a little bit down the road.
Okay, I'll just note if charter, then rate. Okay,
Okay, so that is partially operating levy and fee, but that's tied in with the second one in that the fee for that would the fee for the operations center would then take the pressure off the fund and get us to stabilization. So the fee is really for the operations center. And then I'm still open to a partial bond for an operations center, but with that bond, it would also include parks acquisition. It would be a big bond. It would have parks, pedestrian safety, facilities maintenance, and then drinking water replacements. Drinking,
This,
yeah, the
this
fourth one.
one
Yeah.
and this one.
Yeah.
Okay, so if you're going out, if it were up to you, going out for a bond would include all of these things.
Yes, one big one. And then that third one, general fund staffing, that is partially operating levy and partially fee. And then for the drinking line one, we would also need to remove the charter restriction
Okay,
where that doesn't sustain itself. And then I think the fifth one, while also a bond, also has a bit of a fee component from the parks fee.
okay.
And then the pedestrian bike safety is bond, but also funded by streets fee. So and then parks acquisition is taken care of, and waterfront area projects, that's hopefully grants, maybe some of the money from urban renewal. But yeah,
Okay,
couple of fees, a levy, and a bond.
great. Mr. Groner?
The first two, I think are levies and fees.
So operating levy or fees? Okay,
The operating center is a bond. Acquisition. I think that could be a bond or some sort of levy. Levy on pedestrian cycle and the infrastructure. Anything else to? And, yeah, the tip is basically designed to support water metrics.
okay. Is that helpful?
I think so.
We've got some, there's this around the bonds levies, there's some difference, I think, for some of you are kind of in that camp of be more specific when asking for a bond and like some are, like Kevin's approach here is more include a combination of things. It's a little, the bond ask is a little broader.
It worked for the school district. It should work for us. Like, I'm not joking when I say that. It really should work if it's explained well.
My experience though with bonds is don't be too specific. Say street improvements, don't say First Street.
Yeah, I'm just trying to wrap my head around the direction. It seems to me that what I see now in the red and the priorities, that the mayor's general timeline possibly stands. Operating levy in the fall of 2026, possibly.
It could be a fall 26 or in 27, May 27. I mean, I know we've got people on ballot also, so being thoughtful about how not that that's a problem. I mean, I know that, so
I think I pair well with a levy.
it feels like that one I want to make sure that the work that the council does with the community engagement and polling, and that's like really well defined. And I don't know if we could get there by February for the May ballot. I don't want to rush an operating levy onto the ballot. Only because that's a critical component of, you get one bite at the apple kind of thing. You can't just put that back on if it fails.
Right.
Can we temporarily do fees and have those be replaced by a levy later on, perhaps?
Well, you can, yes.
We would have
You
to
can
be
certainly do
actually
that.
doing
The
that.
levy has to be approved by the voters and the fee approved by council.
Because if that gets us part of the way there in the meantime, we perhaps have to be the only government in history to actually do what we're saying in that front and remove the fee later on. But if we actually did that, that might help with the timeline.
I guess my only concern with that would be like the implementation of a new fee is not something that's like minor. It takes a little while. And so especially if it's a new fee, if it was like something like we were adding to the parks maintenance fee, that would be one thing. But if it's a new fee, like there's a lot that goes into that. And so I wouldn't want to do it just for a few months, if that makes sense.
The other thing is just a little concerned about like the messaging about how to make sure people would understand what was going on in that situation. They could think we're trying to double them up or whatever the right word is.
You could
know what I mean?
probably have it baked into the ballot measure that if that happens, the fee automatically goes away. I don't know.
Good thought.
Well, I've been wondering if, for today's purposes, if where you guys are, give staff enough to at least start to build out some calendars and maybe I'm imagining like a Gantt chart of what this timeline would look like and what some of your next steps might be based on where you've expressed your priorities in the different tools. I think there's still probably more discussion to have around the tools as it gets packaged up, but we also have from your last meeting, you expressed ideas around different engagement strategies. And so that could also be baked into that chart about when you might go out to the community and kind of using what tools at a high level. That
Yeah.
might help you with some of your some of the specifics that you're starting to get into.
And that's where, I guess, at the end of last year, I came up with that term community enhancement fund, which kind of encapsulates the whole thing and is something that can go on for multiple years and be a bond or a levy or something else, and all be mutually supportive as a tool.
So Lauren, is there anything that you see up there that you go, oh no?
I wouldn't necessarily say, oh, no. I caution against like doing all the different things. It just is a lot. We have very limited resources in finance and I can't imagine implementing all of the different things. And so, it takes months to do a full faith and credit obligation. It takes months to implement a fee on a utility bill. It takes months to do a geo bond and all the processes there. So like, it's not just something that we can do overnight. So I would, if there's areas that we can like group into one thing versus doing 4 different things, I would prefer that. But I realize that that might not be the best political way to do it, but yeah. And also just for the ease of understanding too, I think someone just mentioned that, like, we get a lot of calls, especially up at the front desk here, you know, we get a lot of calls and said, it's like, oh, my utility bill raised. Why? And so it's like very much so easy to say like, well, this is the cost of this, X, Y, and Z, versus, oh, my utility bill went up, this local option levy, then there's this, you know, it gets really confusing to people what is paying for what. And so just streamlining it for the public, if possible.
Okay.
What, a couple of thoughts as I'm putting this together. It seems to me that what you're saying is move forward on the operations center and work on perhaps fee replacement for the general fund component as an early phase. Look at small bond and renewing operating levy, but doing polling on that. So the next piece of work would be polling on those pieces to understand, or is that only for the renewing levy? Would this, do you want a small bond to be moving forward? The renewing levy, it sounds like, is on at least a 1 year from now and possibly longer. For the general fund added services that we talked about, the police elements, the parks elements, that you're looking primarily at a renewing levy, it looks to me, vote of the people no sooner than November of next year. Is that right? Okay. So that's useful. There was a quick mention of the May ballot. I want to remind you, we would need to be done with everything in 90 days. That has to be approved by council in mid-February. So that's very fast. If there was something that you were wanting on a May ballot, we don't have time to do all the thinking and we have to like be doing it.
The polling was mainly related to the levy, not as much the bond.
Polling for levy.
But
But
another
the timeline sounds like what I heard from everyone. Not sooner. And not primarily fee-based. So you're looking to diversify the diet. Think about a bond, think about a fee, think about a renewing levy for the main part of the services.
Nothing in May.
And nothing in May.
Well, oh, yeah, were we gonna have do a parks thing in May of 26, or is that too soon?
I think it's too soon and we're stuck with the timeline that we're on. That's very quick to go through the whole process.
We've done it on a short
yeah.
timeline.
It's
If it's a specific, I mean, it's possible.
It just detracts from the rest of it if it's not all well coordinated, I would say.
What exactly are we talking about for putting on the ballot on May?
The mayor said at the beginning, a small bond, and I'm not trying to tie you into
No.
anything, but you started this
I
piece of the conversation.
can say
The
it again.
idea of a small bond for a couple of parks projects and a couple of pedestrian safety projects. That's what I heard.
Okay.
I mean, my thought was, we know kind of some of the pedestrian safety projects. We have a list. We could go through a small prioritization exercise at some point about that. And this just came to my head today when we were talking about parks, because then I realized we have public pedestrian safety stuff that we haven't funded. Well, we could get an initial injection of cash for that while we look at the funding source long-term. And the parks bond issue was related to Parker Road and Oppenlander, and I know there's a couple other projects. We already have the other couple of projects that were brought up, boat landing, and the only thing was with regard to Oppenlander was just, I don't know what the timeline is related to when we have, if we're going to do something like that, when the funding would need to be in place. That was the only main thing that was, so I don't know how much process we have to do for that in May.
I don't see how we can really go for a bond.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah, and even if it needed to happen by then, well, it can't necessarily because we want to do this correctly. So if we don't have an idea of what it is we need to be asking for this late in the game, it's going to have to be something that happens later, I would think. But at the same time, I don't think when people vote, they have like a scorecard in their wallet they take out and, oh, well, I voted yes for that bond, and they currently have that levy still on the books. So I don't know. I don't think people track it quite like that. So yeah, whatever we do, we just need to make sure we're injecting a huge education component before any polling and before any ballot measures.
And I'm hearing from both of you that there's not adequate time to do that before May.
Not the way I would like to, no. If we started really quickly and everyone were on board, like we could probably pull something off, but to do it right, no, I think we need more time.
Okay.
On the other hand, the op center, I think if we really want to start construction in May, when we haven't built out the plans to move forward. So
But the full faith and credit bond does not require a vote of the people. Right?
It sounds to me like you're all supportive of using the full faith and credit on the operations center and then finding some offloading of the general fund component using a fee. That's what I thought I heard. There was some discussion as it went around earlier about the operations center being fully funded by a bond. The timeline makes that challenging, except to do it later, but so Operations Center, first decision tomorrow. Can move it forward and look at fee replacement ideas to supplement it.
So full faith and credit for the op center.
Yep.
And then followed by fee replacement.
Yep.
And maybe partially a bond later. I don't know if that's something we could get to later and sell it as stabilization
Well, is there
and allowing us to do other things.
Is there consensus on that one?
Mhm.
To do a bond later,
Oh, not
another bond
necessarily.
later?
That's
Yeah, I
just
guess
something
that's
we
what I'm,
keep on the
I guess that's what I'm asking, to make sure that there's clear direction for this particular.
Just as an option for later, we can switch our method, but for now, go forward as planned.
I think we want to be really timely on at least the vote to implement fees if we're going to pay for the op center full faith and credit, because currently with our budget forecast, I think rating agencies are going to look at that and go, wow, they really don't have a lot of extra money to pay for this full faith and credit obligation. And so if we had a fee that we're implementing, or at least that council has approved to implement, and we have a plan for that payment, I think it's a lot better, more marketable of a security, which would get us hopefully a better rate and just not necessarily, there would be some concern before that our credit rating wouldn't be as good as, we might take a decline on that.
So
based off
Lauren,
our-
considering the FFCO timeline, when would that information need to be in place for the lenders to look at,
I don't know exactly. I just,
generally speaking?
probably within the next month or so, probably pretty soon here. If we're looking at, doing the full faith and credit obligation in January, February, I would think we would need it before then. Because it would need to be in the official statement going to and then the credit rating would be before that even. So it would be a pretty quick turnaround unless we decided to push out the full faith and credit until like March or April, and then we would have an extra month or so. I think.
Started with a Wait, right, and then less than the bond issue. So maybe.
You mean like going out for a vote later at a later date? I don't know, Carol, you look like you have an answer to that.
I was just going to, the full faith and credit is a bond.
Yeah.
It's just not a general obligation bond that requires the voters to authorize us to go that route.
Not generally as much. There might be a little bit of an interest rate difference. It's more just that geo bonds are secured by property tax revenue. So when you get a geo bond, the residents vote on that and say, yes, I will pay this amount of a levy to pay back the debt service on this fund, on this bond. Whereas a full faith and credit, we don't have that extra property tax revenue coming in. And so it's us saying, our general funds of the city are going to pay for this, or our utility funds or whatnot. We have to kind of say where we're coming up with that money. And so when you, obviously a geo bond is more desirable for, you know, the city because it has revenue source that is going to pay it back. But full faith and credit does not have that extra revenue source. And so that's why I was saying, if we are going to implement a fee, I would hope that we could do that before we even went out for the full faith and credit obligation, or at least had it in process so that we can say, this is how we're going to pay for that bond, or how we're going to pay for a portion of it, if that makes sense.
I think what we want to understand is if we can do that, which I'm completely on board with, not necessarily want to set it in stone today, but I think it's a perfectly fine idea. If we can then switch from the full faith and credit to a go bond later on, if we're able to get that passed, or is that prohibited?
I think that, well, given our timeline today, you guys have just a few minutes left. So if it's a quick answer, I'd say go for it. But
I would say probably not as easy as you would hope, because there's timelines of paying back bonds. And so it's not like you could just redeem the debt on the same day. It's not really very reasonable to do it that way.
There's specific requirements for refunding a bond, and you could refund the bond and roll it into a geo bond, but the timing might not work because you have to actually hold that debt for a while.
could be part of your follow-up conversation. But, okay, so hearing consensus around fees, looking at a fee increase, hopefully, or ideally, before you would go out for your bond. And then again, we have to gather, we're missing one of the council members today, so gathering her information and then doing an aggregate of this with the notes on the other mechanisms for future discussion.
Okay.
And then we can layer in maybe some community engagement recommendations as well, based on the conversation you guys had last time. Does that sound like reasonable next steps? Anything else that you're anticipating as outcomes from this session and the previous? Okay. Well, good job. This was a good start. Staff has more work to do, but hopefully they'll be able to tee up some work sessions to. Okay. Anything else for the good of the order?
No, thank you, everybody, for your participation today, sharing your thoughts. We'll get Mary's thoughts. Her daughter's having emergency surgery, so it wasn't an actual emergency. We miss Mary, but we'll get her thoughts and wish our daughter Claire well. And we will be right back in the room for a nice long meeting tomorrow evening. So busy week for the city council. Thank you, everybody.